The first bullet shattered the diner window at 7:24 in the morning, and by 7:25, a man no one in Grey Haven truly knew had already thrown himself across the room to cover a woman no one in Grey Haven truly knew either. By 7:26, 12 armored SUVs had sealed every exit on Main Street, and every armed man inside them had lowered his weapon without being told to. Not because of the police hadn't arrived yet, because of the mechanic. The quiet one with the grease-stained jacket, and the daughter in the local school, and the small auto shop on the corner of 2nd and Mill. The one who'd lived here 7 years and coached soccer on weekends and accepted too many tomatoes from his neighbor and never, not once, given anyone reason to look at him twice. They looked at him now. 40 armed professionals standing down in the middle of a Pennsylvania street at 7 in the morning because someone had warned them, someone who knew things that weren't public record, that the man crouched behind that diner counter was not what he appeared to be. He wasn't. And neither was the woman he was protecting. What you're about to hear is a story about two people carrying secrets, heavy enough to get them both killed, and what happened when those secrets finally collided in a town small enough that there was nowhere left to hide. It's about the kind of courage that doesn't announce itself, about the difference between running from something and choosing deliberately to stop. If this is your first time here, subscribe right now and hit the notification bell, because this channel is where stories like this one live. Drop a like on this video and tell me in the comments what city and country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story reaches. People from over 50 countries have found this channel, and every comment reminds me why these stories are worth telling. Stay until the end. You'll want to. The bullet didn't come with a warning. 1 second, Grey Haven's Silver Spoon Diner smelled like burnt coffee and bacon grease. The next, the front window exploded inward, a wall of glass and cold morning air. And every person inside froze in that strange half-second before the human brain accepts that something has gone terribly wrong. Every person except one. Ethan Walker was already moving. He crossed the room in 3 strides, threw himself across the booth, and pulled Sophia Bennett down behind the counter before the second shot punched through the drywall where her head had been. Nobody in that diner understood what they were watching. They saw a mechanic, grease-stained jacket, calloused hands, a man who'd spent the morning arguing with a diesel engine, move through a live shooting like he'd rehearsed it 1,000 times. Because he had. What happened next? No one in Grey Haven would ever fully explain. 12 black SUVs materialized on Main Street as if they'd been waiting just around the corner. 40-something armed men in tactical gear poured out, and then, inexplicably, stood down. Weapons lowered, hands raised. Not because of the police who hadn't arrived yet, not because of any order from above, because of the man crouched behind that counter, bleeding from a glass cut along his jaw, holding a terrified woman steady while his eyes swept the street with the kind of cold, unhurried precision that doesn't come from watching action movies. Nobody in Grey Haven knew who Ethan really was. They were about to find out. Before we go any further, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because this channel is where stories like this one live. Stories with real stakes, real tension, real people making impossible choices. Like this video, drop a comment and tell me what city and country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. You're going to want to stay until the very end. Grey Haven, Pennsylvania, was the kind of town that looked better in photographs than it felt to actually live in. The downtown corridor had those old brick buildings with iron fire escapes, a couple of traffic lights, a farmer's market on Saturdays, and the persistent smell of the paper mill on the east side of the river that nobody talked about anymore because they'd all stopped noticing it years ago. It was small enough that everyone recognized each other's cars, but large enough that you could still have secrets. Ethan Walker had several. He'd moved there 7 years ago with a 3-year-old girl named Lily and a pickup truck that burned oil and a story that wasn't entirely untrue, just carefully incomplete. He told people he was ex-military, which was accurate. He told people he'd done some overseas work, which was also accurate. He didn't tell people which unit, which missions, which countries, or why he'd left. People in Grey Haven were polite enough not to push, and Ethan was skilled enough at being likable that they never felt the door closing in their face. He'd built Walker Automotive on the corner of 2nd and Mill Street mostly by himself, knocked out the back wall to expand the bay, poured the concrete pad himself over one long weekend, talked the bank into a loan that he paid off in 4 years instead of 10. He was good with engines. He was patient with customers. He gave veterans a 20% discount and let a single mother run a tab for 3 months when her transmission went out. He coached Lily's soccer team on weekends and burned pancakes most Sunday mornings and kept the television off after 8 o'clock because his daughter needed sleep. He had a neighbor, old Pete Gallagher, who brought him tomatoes from a garden that produced approximately 900 tomatoes per summer, and Ethan always accepted them graciously, even though he didn't particularly like tomatoes. That was Ethan Walker's life in Grey Haven. Small, manageable, chosen. He knew, on some level, that it couldn't last forever. Men who'd done what he'd done had a certain gravity to them. Things found them eventually, the way water finds cracks in concrete. But he'd had 7 years, and 7 years was more than some people got, and he'd made good use of them. The woman who called herself Claire Medina had been working at the Silver Spoon for about 4 months before Ethan noticed something was off. He ate there on Tuesday mornings because Lily had swim practice early and he needed coffee and a place to sit that wasn't his shop. Claire worked the morning shift, mid-20s, he'd guessed, quiet and efficient, the kind of waitress who refilled your cup before you asked, and never stood around chatting. She was pretty in a way that looked like she was trying not to be. Hair pulled back tight, no jewelry, clothes that were practical rather than anything else. She smiled at customers the way service workers learn to smile. Present, but disconnected. But there was something else there. Something underneath. Ethan noticed it slowly, the way you notice a structural problem in a building. Not all at once, but in a series of small details that accumulate until you can't ignore the picture they're drawing together. The first thing he noticed was how she sat when she took her breaks. She never sat with her back to the door. Always positioned herself with sight lines to both the front entrance and the side exit. Most people never thought about that. Most people just grabbed a chair. She was doing it automatically, without drama, the way someone does when it's been trained into them, or when they've learned the hard way why it matters. The second thing was the way she tracked strangers. Grey Haven didn't get many new faces, but when it did, a delivery truck driver, a couple passing through, a man who came in 3 Tuesdays in a row and sat near the window. Claire cataloged them. Ethan could see it in the slight shift of her attention, the almost imperceptible pause in whatever she was doing. She wasn't paranoid about it. It was calibrated, controlled. The third thing was the car. He'd seen it once, parked at an odd angle behind the diner near the dumpsters. A 2019 Honda Civic, dark blue. Nothing notable about it. He probably wouldn't have thought twice about it, except that one afternoon his 16-year-old helper Marcus had found a small magnetic box on the undercarriage of a customer's Mazda during a routine oil change, a GPS tracker, the cheap consumer kind. And Ethan had glanced outside at the Civic parked there and felt a cold thread of recognition pass through him. He didn't say anything, not yet. The fourth thing was the bruise. It wasn't visible most of the time, but one cold morning when she was reaching up to grab menus off the high shelf, her sleeve rode up and he caught a glimpse, fading yellow and purple along her inner forearm, the particular shape of something that came from fingers gripping too hard. That was the one that stayed with him. He thought about it driving home that Tuesday. He thought about it through soccer practice on Thursday. He told himself it wasn't his problem, which was true. He told himself he didn't know enough to draw any conclusions, which was also true. He told himself that Grey Haven had a police department and domestic situations were exactly the kind of thing a private citizen should stay well out of. Then he thought about the GPS tracker and the way she positioned herself near exits and the 3 Tuesday appearances of the man who'd sat by the window. He drove past the diner on Friday night just to drive past it. The man from the window was parked across the street, not eating, not on his phone. Just sitting there in a late-model Chevy Tahoe with tinted glass and Pennsylvania plates, watching the front entrance. Ethan sat in his pickup at the end of the block for a while. Then he drove home, put Lily to bed, and started paying much more careful attention. The morning of November 14th was cold and clear, the kind of morning where everything feels slightly too sharp, sunlight too bright, sounds carrying too far. The way November mornings in Pennsylvania get, when the temperature drops below freezing overnight and the air itself tightens. Ethan was in his usual booth at the Silver Spoon at 7:22 a.m., black coffee in front of him, half a stack of pancakes he was eating without much enthusiasm. He had a timing chain job waiting for him at the shop, and he was mentally organizing the sequence of it. Whether to pull the water pump while he was in there, whether Marcus had remembered to order the gasket set when the front window came apart. He was already out of the booth before the second shot. His body did things that his conscious mind was only half directing. He moved low, cut around a panicking waitress, registered the angle of the first impact on the window frame, came from the northeast, elevated, maybe a parked vehicle, on the upper level of the parking structure across the street, and reached Claire just as she stumbled backward from the counter. He took her down behind the steel prep counter in the kitchen corridor, and he put himself between her and the window, and he gripped her shoulder with one hand and said flatly, "Don't move. Don't look up. Just breathe." She didn't scream. That registered. Most people screamed. She pressed herself flat against the base of the cabinet and pulled her knees in and looked at him with dark eyes that were frightened but functional. And he thought, this woman has been in bad situations before. "How many?" she said. "At least one. Elevated position across the street, watching for a second shooter." He did a fast visual sweep through the pass-through window above them. Parking structure northeast. Second level, probably. "Stay down." Someone in the dining room was crying. A child somewhere. The cook had knocked over an entire tray of dishes, retreating to the back corner. Normal sounds, normal panic. Ethan filtered them out. Then he heard the SUVs. He heard them before he saw them. The particular bass rumble of heavy vehicles, more than one, more than three. And he eased his eyes above the counter line just enough to see Main Street filling with black Yukons. Not police. No light bars. These were private, tactical, expensive, and there were a lot of them. The man from the window booth across the street materialized at the diner's side entrance. Not the front, the side, which told Ethan he'd repositioned while everyone was focused on the shooting. He was moving toward the kitchen with purpose, not panic, reaching inside his jacket. Ethan hit him low and fast, came up under the reach, controlled the arm, and put him into the door frame with enough force to end the conversation. He took the man's weapon, a compact SIG, clean, suppressor-threaded, and stepped back. "Don't," Ethan said, and something in his voice made the man stay exactly where he was on the floor. Outside, the SUVs had arranged themselves in a pattern that Ethan recognized from a different life in different climates. Containment formation, not an assault, containment. They were here to surround, not to breach, which meant they were here because of her, and they hadn't expected her to have someone with her. He turned to find Claire and stopped, because the woman standing up from behind the counter was not quite the same person who'd been taking his Tuesday morning coffee orders for 4 months. She was still in the same uniform, still had flour on her sleeve from somebody's biscuits, and her hands were shaking slightly, the way hands do when adrenaline runs hard and cold. But the way she was standing was different, straighter. Something in the way she looked at the SUVs through the broken window. Not confused, not helpless, but calculating. "You need to tell me something," Ethan said. She looked at him for a moment. Outside, nobody was moving. The armed men on the street were waiting, and Ethan didn't know why. "My name isn't Claire," she said. "I figured." "It's Sophia." She paused. "Sophia Bennett." He didn't react outwardly. Inwardly, several pieces of a puzzle he hadn't realized he'd been assembling rearranged themselves with unpleasant speed. "Bennett," he said. "As in Bennett Global." "As in." He looked at the SUVs again. 40-plus armed men, sitting still, waiting. "Why aren't they coming in?" he said, mostly to himself. "Because they know who you are," Sophia said quietly. "Or they think they do. That's why they stopped." He turned to look at her fully. "Who do they think I am?" he said. She met his eyes, and there was something in her expression that wasn't quite an apology, but lived in the same neighborhood. "Someone they were told to be afraid of," she said, "which means either they know about your real background, or someone warned them about you specifically. Either way." She swallowed. "You didn't have to do that. Step in front of it. You could have just stayed in your booth." "No," Ethan said. "I couldn't." He didn't elaborate. It wasn't even entirely sure he could explain it. Some things were just the shape of who you were, and you either followed the shape or you didn't. He set the SIG on the counter with a deliberate motion and reached into his jacket for his phone. "My daughter is at school," he said. "That's the first call I'm making. After that, you're going to tell me everything." Sophia Bennett nodded. Outside on Main Street, Greyhaven had gone completely still. A whole street full of armed professionals and shattered glass and unanswered questions, waiting for a mechanic with grease under his fingernails to decide what to do next. Ethan Walker dialed Lily's school. He'd been careful for 7 years. He'd built a quiet life and kept it small and stayed well away from anything that looked like what his life used to look like. He already knew, somewhere in the part of him that was still and always would be a SEAL, that the 7 years were over. The police arrived 11 minutes after the shooting. Ethan knew this because he'd been counting, the way he always counted when things went sideways. Not out of anxiety, but out of habit. The same habit that had once told him how long he had before a patrol route circled back, how many seconds between a signal and a response. 11 minutes was a long time. Long enough to make him think about what that meant for a small town with a station 6 blocks away. He'd spent those 11 minutes doing several things at once. He'd called Lily's school and spoken to the front office and told them without explanation that Lily was not to leave the building with anyone except him, and the woman on the phone had started to ask questions, and he'd said, with a particular kind of quietness that tended to stop questions, "Please just do that for me." She did. He'd also kept eyes on the street, where the tactical SUVs had not moved. 12 vehicles, engines still running, men still outside them, standing around with the uncomfortable body language of people waiting on orders that weren't coming. And he'd watched Sophia. She'd found a chair near the back of the kitchen, away from the broken glass, and she was sitting in it with both hands flat on her thighs, which he recognized as someone deliberately managing their own adrenaline response. Her breathing was controlled. Her eyes were moving. She wasn't in shock. She was processing, the same way he was, just doing it quietly in a corner while he managed the immediate perimeter. The cook, a heavy-set man named Dale, who Ethan had spoken to maybe 4 times in his life, was sitting on an overturned milk crate smoking a cigarette with the focused desperation of a man who'd been trying to quit for years and had just found an excellent excuse not to. 2 customers had retreated to the far end of the dining room. A third had left out the back exit, which was her right. When the first patrol car finally rolled up, one car, which told Ethan something, Ethan moved to the front of the diner and put himself in view, hands visible, not aggressive, just present. The officer who came in was young, mid-20s, name tag read Flores, hand already on his holster even though the immediate threat was obviously past. His eyes went to the broken window, the shattered glass across the booths, the man Ethan had put in the doorframe, who was now sitting against the wall with a split eyebrow and a certain thoughtful expression. "Sir," Flores started, "I need everyone to—" "Back booth," Ethan said quietly. "Woman needs to be checked for glass fragments. She may not know she's cut. There's a weapon on the kitchen counter, suppressor-threaded Sig Sauer, belonged to that man there. He came in through the side entrance while the shooting was happening, moving toward the kitchen. Not a coincidence," he paused. "Your backup is late." Flores stared at him. "Who are you?" "I eat here on Tuesdays." It wasn't a full answer, and they both knew it, but Ethan had learned long ago that giving people slightly less than they expected tended to buy more time than giving them everything at once. Flores was already on his radio, already calling in, and Ethan stepped back and let the machinery of a police response begin to grind forward, because that was the right thing to do in the presence of a young officer doing his job, even if Ethan had significant doubts about what was going to happen next. Those doubts proved accurate within about 40 minutes. 2 detectives arrived. They introduced themselves as Marsh and Coyle, both out of the County Criminal Investigations Unit, which was unusual for a small city shooting that hadn't yet produced a body. Marsh was in his 50s, heavy through the shoulders, with the practiced friendliness of someone who'd interviewed a lot of people and found that smiling helped. Coyle was younger, quieter, and kept looking at Sophia in a way that Ethan didn't like. Not predatory exactly, but too attentive, too specific. They separated Ethan and Sophia immediately, which was standard procedure, and also, Ethan noticed, removed his ability to see what was being said to her. Marsh took Ethan to the far end of the dining room, offered him coffee from the diner's pot like they were old friends settling in for a conversation, and started with the easy questions. What time did Ethan arrive? Where was he sitting? Did he see anything before the shooting? What direction did he think the shots came from? Ethan answered honestly and completely, because there was no reason not to. He described the shot angles, the timing, the entrance pattern of the man through the side door. He did not describe his own movements in the kind of detail that would raise questions he wasn't ready to answer. Then Marsh said, almost casually, "The woman you were with, Claire Medina. She works here," Ethan said. Right. Marsh nodded, wrote something. "You two know each other well?" "I eat here Tuesday mornings. She takes my order." "But you went to her specifically when the shooting started, not toward the exit." "She was closest to the window." Marsh looked at him. Ethan looked back. Nothing in his expression gave anything away, because nothing in his expression ever gave anything away when he didn't want it to, and this was one of those times. "Mr. Walker," Marsh said, and shifted his weight slightly, leaning in with the body language of someone about to drop something serious. "We're going to need to take Ms. Medina in for her own protection. There are some concerns about her safety that go beyond what local PD can manage." "What concerns?" Ethan said. "I can't go into specifics." "Where would you be taking her?" "A county facility, safe location." Ethan said nothing for a moment. He looked at Marsh's hands. Marsh's left hand had a slight tremor. Not noticeable if you weren't looking, but Ethan was looking. He looked at Coyle across the room, still positioned between Sophia and the nearest exit, still with that too specific attention. "Is that a request?" Ethan said slowly. "Or are you telling me?" "Just the safest option for everyone," Marsh said, still smiling. Ethan nodded like he was considering it. He glanced toward the kitchen under the pretense of looking for his phone, and through the pass-through he could see Sophia's face. She was looking directly at him. She gave the smallest possible shake of her head. That was enough. "She'll need to gather her things," Ethan said. "Give me 2 minutes." Marsh nodded agreeably, and Ethan walked toward the kitchen, and Marsh did not follow because Marsh believed he was dealing with a cooperative civilian who'd been through a stressful morning and would do what he was told. He leaned down next to Sophia's chair and kept his voice at the level of background noise. "Back exit," he said. 30 seconds. "They'll have someone outside," she said immediately. "I know where they're parked. There's a gap on the south side. Alley runs behind the laundromat. My truck is on 2nd Street. He handed her his key. "Gray, F-150. Don't start it until I get there." She took the key without hesitation, which told him she'd already been working the angles herself. "Walker," she said quietly. "Yeah." "If they're already this organized, if they already have county detectives—" "I know," he said. "Go." She went. He walked back to Marsh and said he couldn't find his phone and thought he might have left it in his truck. And Marsh's smile went a few degrees thinner, and Coyle started moving, and Ethan stepped cleanly into Coyle's path in a way that looked completely accidental. 2 men in a crowded kitchen corridor. Just a collision, purely physical, nobody's fault. And by the time Coyle got himself sorted and Marsh understood what was happening, the back exit was already closing behind Sophia Bennett. What followed was not graceful. Coyle grabbed Ethan's arm and Ethan let himself be grabbed, because fighting a county detective in a diner kitchen wasn't a move that helped anyone. And he looked at Coyle with the kind of blankness that communicated very clearly that Coyle was welcome to escalate this if he wanted to, but should consider the cost. Coyle let go. "You're interfering with a law enforcement operation," Marsh said. The friendliness was entirely gone now. "You're trying to take a shooting victim to an undisclosed location without a warrant or a stated charge," Ethan said. "If that's a law enforcement operation, you'll be able to explain it clearly at the station. I'm happy to go with you and make a statement." He paused. "Is that what you want?" It wasn't. They both knew it wasn't. And Ethan taking himself voluntarily to the station meant paperwork, witnesses, a formal record of the conversation they'd just had, none of which Marsh and Coyle appeared to want. They let him walk out the front door. He went around the block the long way, watching his six the entire time, and found his truck on 2nd Street with Sophia already in the passenger seat with her knees drawn up and both hands pressed flat against her thighs again. That same deliberate, effortful calm. He got in, started the engine, and pulled out normally. Not fast, not slow. They drove for 6 blocks in silence. "Okay," Ethan finally said. "All of it." Sophia let out a breath that had clearly been waiting. "How much do you know about Bennett Global Industries?" "Technology conglomerate, defense contracts, some commercial infrastructure, cybersecurity division. Your father founded it." "My father founded it," she confirmed. "He's been stepping back from operations over the last few years. Health issues, not public knowledge. I stepped in as acting CEO 18 months ago. She paused. Interim, officially. Nobody in the executive suite believed it was going to be permanent. They tolerated me while they made other plans. What kind of plans? She was quiet for a moment, looking out at the gray November streets of Grey Haven rolling past the window. When she spoke again, her voice was flat in the way voices get when someone has been over the same material so many times it's worn smooth. Bennett Global runs subsidiary operations in about a dozen countries. Defense logistics, data infrastructure, some energy sector investment, legitimate operations mostly. The kind of company that does boring, complicated things very profitably. She turned to look at him. About 2 years ago, I started noticing anomalies in the subsidiary financials. Routing patterns that didn't make sense. Transfer volumes that didn't correspond to any contract activity I could identify. Money laundering, Ethan said. Billions. Over maybe 6 or 7 years, structured across 40 or 50 shell companies in jurisdictions with limited oversight. She said it the way you say something that still makes you feel slightly sick even after you've said it 100 times. They were using the company's legitimate infrastructure as a tunnel. Clean money goes in, dirty money comes out the other end looking like investment returns. Who's they? She looked at him steadily. Senior Executive Committee, 5, maybe 6 people at the top. Not all of them, but enough. She paused. And whoever they were moving the money for. I don't have the full picture on that yet. What I do know is that the financial flows connect to 3 violent criminal networks operating across the eastern seaboard. Narcotics, weapons, human trafficking infrastructure. Her voice didn't waver on the last 2 words, but something tightened around her eyes. The company my father built has been financing organized violence for years, and the people running it knew exactly what they were doing. Ethan drove. He turned onto Route 9 and headed south, away from the center of town, just to be moving. When did they realize you knew? He said. I made the mistake of bringing it to our general counsel. I trusted him. I shouldn't have. He was part of it, or at least close enough to part of it, that he passed the information up. She looked at her hands. 3 days later, someone broke into my home. They didn't take anything. They just moved things, very slightly. A chair an inch out of position, a book turned the wrong way on a shelf. It was a message. We know what you found, and we know where you live. A pause. I had about 48 hours to decide what to do. You ran, Ethan said. I ran, she agreed. There was no defensiveness in it. I had evidence. Not enough yet, but some. I secured copies in locations they couldn't access. I emptied one personal account, left everything else untouched so it didn't look like flight, and I disappeared. She looked out the window again. Grey Haven was random. That was intentional. I used a random selection method specifically so no pattern in my behavior could lead someone here. But they found you anyway. It took them 4 months. She said it like it was a small victory, which Ethan supposed it was. The GPS tracker under my car. That's when I knew they'd found the thread. I removed it, but the damage was done. How long had it been there? I think about 2 weeks, maybe less. Ethan was quiet for a moment, running the math. 2 weeks since the tracker was placed. The man from the Tuesday window booth. He'd first appeared 3 weeks ago. So they'd had eyes on her before the tracker, which meant the tracker was a confirmation, not a discovery. They already knew before the tracker, he said. Sophia absorbed this without visible reaction, but the slight whitening around her knuckles where her hands were pressed flat told him it landed. Which means the tracker was planted to give them precision timing, he said. And the shooting today was not improvised. No, she said. The shooting today was an opening move. He turned that over. You said those men outside recognized me, the tactical units. Or recognized what you are, she said carefully. When you moved in there, the way you moved, whoever's running security on their end would have eyes on that diner the moment the shooting started. Body cams, vehicle cams, something. You don't move like a mechanic, Ethan. You haven't since I started watching you. You've been watching me. You've been watching me, she said without apology. We've been watching each other for 2 months. I just wanted to acknowledge that out loud. He glanced at her. She was looking at him directly, and despite everything, the broken glass still dusting the collar of her uniform, the fact that they were driving away from a professional hit attempt with 2 corrupt county detectives somewhere behind them, She held the look without flinching. Fair enough, he said. She'd been thorough, he realized, more thorough than he'd given her credit for. She'd made him as something other than a mechanic, and she'd stayed anyway, and she'd been building her own read of the situation while he'd been building his, and neither of them had said anything about it for 2 months, because both of them understood the value of patience. He thought about that for a while. They stopped at a gas station 20 miles outside of town. Cash only, he paid for fuel and 2 coffees from the machine inside that tasted like hot cardboard and vaguely of artificial hazelnut. He handed Sophia one, and she took it without looking at what it was and drank it without commenting on how bad it was, which he filed away as a data point about her. The men in the SUVs, he said, leaning against the truck in the thin November sunlight. They backed off because they thought they recognized me. But who I used to be isn't public information, so whoever they're working for knew specifically to warn them about the possibility of a former SEAL operator in the picture. He watched her expression. She was already ahead of him. Which means, Sophia said slowly, whoever is running this didn't just find me. They ran background on everyone in my orbit, everyone I'd had regular contact with. She set the coffee down on the truck bed. They know who you are, or they know enough. Which also means, Ethan said, that they now know we left together, and they'll assume you've told me everything. I've told you most of it. Most of it. She looked at him for a moment, and the gray light made her look tired in a way that the diner lighting never had. The kind of tired that comes from months of being frightened and functional at the same time, which is an exhausting combination that leaves its mark. There's a name, she said. I didn't want to say it while we were still in the city, but say it now. Victor Kane, she said, Chief Operations Officer. He's been with the company for 22 years. My father trusted him completely. She paused. I think he built this entire structure, not as a side operation, not as something that got out of hand. I think it was the plan from the beginning, or close to it. Use the company as infrastructure for something much larger and much worse, and keep it buried under enough legitimate business that no one ever looked. Ethan said nothing. The name didn't register for him, not yet, but something about the way she said it, the particular weight she gave it, told him that it should. He's the one who flagged the general counsel, she said. He's the one who sent the message about my apartment, and I think he's the one who ordered the shooting today. She looked at Ethan steadily. Which means he also approved whatever warning they gave those tactical units about you specifically. He knew your name before today. He knew it, and he had it filed somewhere for exactly this kind of contingency. The gas pump clicked off behind them. Ethan straightened up, replaced the nozzle, recapped the tank. His shoulder was stiffening where he'd hit the doorframe going through the side entrance, and his jaw still had dried blood along the cut from the glass. He was aware of both things in the distant, cataloging way he was aware of most physical discomfort. Information rather than complaint. My daughter finishes school at 3:15, he said. I need to figure out where she goes after that, and it can't be home. I'm sorry, Sophia said quietly. I'm sorry that this is now your problem. It became my problem when I moved here, he said. There was no resentment in it, just fact. I knew the shape of a life like mine coming in. There's always something eventually. He opened the driver's side door. I'm not angry at you, but I need you to give me everything, every piece of information you have, every name, every location. No withholding because you think you're protecting me. You understand? She nodded. And Sophia. He said her real name for the first time, and something in her face shifted slightly at the sound of it, like something unclenched. Those men in the suits today, they backed down. He met her eyes. That's going to bother whoever sent them, and he's going to move faster because of it. So we have less time than we did this morning. I know, she said. Then let's use it. He got in the truck and she got in beside him, and they pulled back onto the highway as the thin November sun climbed as high as it was going to get that day, which wasn't very high, and the coffee grew cold in their hands, and somewhere behind them in Greyhaven, a street full of broken glass was waiting for answers that nobody with honest intentions was going to provide. Ethan drove south and started making a list in his head, not of problems, but of assets, because that was how he'd been trained to think. And because in a situation like this one, the difference between those two categories was the only thing that mattered. He had skills, he had patience, he had a daughter he needed to keep safe, and a woman beside him who'd been running a one-person intelligence operation for 4 months on diner wages and sheer nerve. He also had, somewhere at the back of his memory, a cold recognition that had been growing since Sophia said Victor Kane's name. Something he couldn't quite bring to the surface yet. Some buried connection that pulled at the edge of his recall like a hook in still water. He let it sit. It would come. It always came eventually. The memory came back to him that night. Not all at once. It never worked that way. It came the way most things came back from that part of his life. In pieces. The way a photograph develops in a dark room. Shapes emerging from gray nothing until suddenly you're looking at something you recognize and your stomach drops because you know exactly what you're seeing. They were in a motel 26 miles outside of Grey Haven. 2 rooms, adjoining door, paid cash at the front desk to a woman who didn't look up from her phone long enough to register their faces. The motel was called the Harborview, which was optimistic given that the nearest body of water was a drainage creek behind the parking lot. The carpet was brown, and the heating unit rattled, and someone 2 doors down had a television running at volume, but it was anonymous, and it was off the route anyone would logically run, and those 2 things were what mattered. Lily was in Ethan's room. He'd picked her up from school himself, showed up at the front office at 2 o'clock, an hour early, and told the secretary there'd been a family situation. Lily was 10, sharp in the particular way that children of solitary parents often are, and she'd taken one look at his face in the parking lot and said, "Dad, what happened to your jaw?" "Cut it this morning. I'm fine." "You're not fine. What's going on?" "I'll explain later. Get in the truck." She'd gotten in the truck. She hadn't stopped asking questions for the entire drive, not with the panic of a frightened child, but with the methodical persistence of someone who understood she wasn't getting the full story and was filing pieces for later. He told her enough. There was a situation, they needed to stay somewhere else for a couple of nights. It was going to be okay. She'd accepted this with the kind of tight-lipped, watchful composure that had always made him feel simultaneously proud and guilty. Because no 10-year-old should have that much practice at accepting uncertainty from the person who was supposed to be the stable one. He'd introduced her to Sophia, briefly, in the motel parking lot. Sophia had crouched to Lily's level, not in the performative, condescending way adults sometimes did with children, but naturally, like it was just the easier way to have a conversation, and said, "Hi, I'm Sophia. I know this is really weird, and I'm sorry." Lily had looked at her for a moment, measuring, then looked at her father. "Is she the reason your jaw is cut?" "Not exactly," Ethan said. "Close enough," Sophia said, which made Lily almost smile, which was more than Ethan had managed in the last 3 hours. He got Lily settled, she had homework, and she did it at the small desk with the methodical seriousness she brought to everything, and he ordered pizza delivery to the front desk number so nothing would come directly to the room, and she ate half of it and fell asleep in her clothes on top of the bedspread at 8:30, still holding a pencil. He watched her sleep for a moment. The television noise from down the hall, the rattling heating unit, his daughter breathing slowly in a brown-carpeted motel room 26 miles from the only home she remembered, because her father had moved to a town called Grey Haven 7 years ago and tried to build something small and intact and had apparently not been as invisible as he'd believed. He covered her with the extra blanket from the closet and knocked quietly on the adjoining door. Sophia had her laptop open on the bed. A secondary device, she'd explained, purchased for cash 18 months ago and never connected to any network associated with her real identity. She'd been cross-referencing financial documents, things she'd photographed or exported before disappearing, the accumulated evidence of months of careful, solitary investigation. Her shoes were off. She'd found a takeout menu from somewhere and hadn't ordered anything from it, but was holding it like something to do with her hands. "She asleep?" Sophia asked. "Yeah." He sat in the chair by the window, the one with the slightly broken armrest, and looked at the wall for a moment. "Tell me about Kane's operational history, not the corporate record, the real timeline. When did the shell structures start appearing?" Sophia set the menu down. "The earliest traces I can find go back about 9 years. But it's gradual. The first structures look almost legitimate. Subsidiary routing for tax efficiency, which everyone does at that level. It's only when you go 3 or 4 layers deep and start following the actual fund flows that the picture changes." She turned the laptop so he could see the screen. "These 3 entities, Caravel Logistics, Sutton Bridge Capital, and this one here, Meridian 11 LLC. They don't exist in any meaningful operational sense. They're envelopes. Money goes in as consulting fees or licensing revenue, and what comes out on the other end is categorized as investment returns in markets that conveniently don't require detailed beneficial ownership disclosure. Ethan leaned forward, looking at the screen without touching it. The numbers were large, the structure was intricate. It had the feel of something built by someone who was genuinely good at it, which was its own kind of unsettling. 9 years, he said, and that was when it came back to him. Not all at once. First just the number, 9 years, hitting something in the back of his memory like a tuning fork. Then the shape of it. Then the specific weight of a particular evening in a forward operating base in a country he wasn't supposed to be in officially, sitting across from a man from Naval Intelligence who was laying out an Operation Compromise for Ethan's commanding officer. Intelligence had leaked. The mission parameters had been in the hands of the opposition before the team was wheels up. 2 men had died because of it. The leak had been traced to a defense contractor with ties to an American technology company. He hadn't known the company's name at the time. Need to know. And it hadn't been his to know. He'd been the operator on the ground, not the investigator. He'd been the one who lost 2 teammates and had to write letters to 2 families, and then spend 18 months in the corrosive fog of an internal investigation that went nowhere, officially, and ended with a determination that the leak had come from a foreign intelligence service rather than a domestic source. He had never believed that determination. His commanding officer, a man named Reeves, who Ethan trusted completely, and who was now retired in coastal Maine and didn't talk about the work anymore, had told him quietly in the parking lot after the final briefing. Someone made sure this didn't go where it should have gone. I don't know who, and I can't prove it, but you should know. Ethan had left the Navy 6 months later. Not because they pushed him, they hadn't exactly, but because he'd understood that the thing he'd believed the work was about, and the thing the work actually was, had a gap in them that he couldn't keep operating across. He sat very still in the chair by the motel window. Kane, he said, before Bennett Global. What was he doing? Sophia looked at him. Something in his voice had changed register, and she heard it. He came up through defense contracting, worked for 2 or 3 mid-level firms before my father recruited him. She paused. Why? Which firms? She reached for the laptop, pulled up something from memory. Arcos Defense Partners was the main one. Before that, a company called Sentinel Bridge Group. They were acquired and dissolved about... She stopped, looked at the screen. About 8 years ago. Ethan said nothing for a long moment. Sentinel Bridge, he said. You recognize it. He stood up from the chair and went to the window and looked at the parking lot, at the orange sodium lights reflecting off the wet asphalt, at his truck parked in the corner spot because corner spots gave you the most visibility on approach. His mind was doing several things at the same time, and he needed a moment to let them finish. 8 years ago, he said, I was part of a SEAL element that ran an interdiction operation in a region I'm not going to name. The mission was compromised before we were on the ground. We lost 2 men. He stopped. He didn't turn around. The investigation concluded the leak originated overseas. I never believed that. My CO didn't believe it either. He paused. Sentinel Bridge Group held the logistics and communications contract for that operation. Behind him, he heard Sophia set the laptop down very carefully on the bedspread. Ethan. If Kane was running Sentinel Bridge's operational division at that time, he said, or if he had access to the contract intelligence that came through that firm, he stopped again. Breathed. He didn't just build a criminal structure inside Bennett Global. He's been running intelligence assets for criminal networks for close to a decade, maybe longer, and he burned a classified military operation to protect one of those networks when it got too close. The silence in the room was of the particular quality that descends when something that has been theoretical becomes real. I need to know for certain, Ethan said. He turned around. Do you have any documentation of Kane's role at Sentinel Bridge? Personnel records, contract filings, anything? Not here, but I know where to look. She was already on the laptop. Sentinel Bridge was absorbed by a holding company before dissolution. The corporate records are technically public, buried, but public. Give me 20 minutes. He gave her 20 minutes. He stood in the doorway between the 2 rooms and watched Lily sleep and listened to the heating unit rattle and let his mind work the problem the way he'd been trained to work problems. Not from the emotional center of it, not from the anger that was genuinely present, and which he had no intention of indulging right now, but from the outside edges inward, identifying what was known, what was unknown, and what could be made known with available resources. What he knew, Victor Kane had built a criminal financial structure inside Bennett Global over approximately 9 years. The structure moved money for violent criminal networks. Kane had anticipated Sophia's investigation and moved to eliminate her. He had access to private intelligence about Ethan's background, which meant either a surveillance apparatus or contacts in places where that information would be held. What he didn't know, the full extent of Kane's criminal network, how deep law enforcement corruption ran. Marsh and Coyle were two names, but the tactical units on Main Street suggested something much more organized and much better funded. Whether Sophia's evidence was sufficient to matter legally, or whether it would be suppressed or discredited before it reached anyone who could act on it. What could be made known? Kane's connection to Sentinel Bridge, if Sophia found the documentation. The specific financial flows, if the evidence held up. The identities of the tactical contractors, who left traces even when they tried not to. Sophia said, "Come here." He went. She turned the laptop to face him. There was a corporate disclosure filing on the screen. Old, the formatting of something scanned from a paper document into a database, the kind of thing that lived in a government archive and never got looked at because nobody knew to look. Personnel declaration for Sentinel Bridge Group's Federal Contracting Division. A list of officers and senior directors with their roles and dates of service. Victor Kane, Deputy Director. Intelligence Operations. Service dates encompassing the year of Ethan's compromised mission. Ethan looked at it for a long time. "Okay," he said. "I'm sorry," Sophia said. She said it quietly, and she meant it in the specific way of someone who has just handed another person confirmation of something terrible. "Don't be," he said. This is actually useful. This connects him to a federal crime that has nothing to do with Bennett Global. Military intelligence compromise, 2 servicemen killed. That's a different category of prosecution than financial fraud." He straightened up. "Which means if we can get this to the right federal investigators, we're not relying solely on your corporate evidence. We have a second line of attack." "Getting it to the right federal investigators," Sophia said carefully, "is the problem. Marsh and Coyle tell us the corruption goes into local and county law enforcement. The tactical contractors on the street tell us Kane has private security assets that are organized and well-funded. We don't know how far the contamination runs." "We need someone federal and specific," Ethan said. "Someone whose appointment is recent enough that Kane wouldn't have had time to develop a relationship, and whose jurisdiction covers both the financial crimes and the intelligence compromise." He thought for a moment. "I have one name, someone I served with who went into federal law enforcement after leaving the military. I don't know if she's in a position to act on this, but I trust her." "One name," Sophia said. "It's enough to start." He didn't make the call that night. He needed to establish that his phone hadn't been compromised, and he needed to think through the approach carefully, because a phone call to a federal agent that went wrong wasn't a recoverable error. He spent 2 hours working through the evidence Sophia had accumulated. She walked him through it, document by document, explaining her methodology, where she'd gotten each piece and how she'd verified it. It was substantial. It was not, on its own, airtight. It told a story that required interpretation, required someone to follow the threads she'd identified and pull them in the right sequence. But it was real, and it was carefully organized, and it had been compiled by someone who understood what she was looking at. "You did all of this by yourself," he said. It wasn't quite a question. "I couldn't trust anyone," she said, "and I couldn't stop. If I stopped, it felt like—" She paused, looking at the screen. "Like I was just hiding, just surviving. I needed to feel like I was doing something that would matter." He understood that. He understood it in the specific way that people understand things they have felt themselves. The difference between existing and moving toward something, which in certain circumstances is the only thing that keeps a person functional. "Your father," he said. "You mentioned his health earlier. Does Kane have access to him?" The expression that crossed her face answered the question before she spoke. "My father lives at the family estate outside Philadelphia. He has a care staff, a house manager. He's not very well cognitively. It's been gradual over the last 3 years." She said it with the specific flatness of grief that's been managed for too long. Kane has had unrestricted access to him for years. He's been the person my father trusted to handle things when he couldn't, which means Kane may have been making decisions in your father's name, Ethan said. Authorizations, directions, corporate actions. I think so. I can't prove it yet, but I think so. And your father is alone with Kane's people right now. Yes, she said. That's been keeping me up at night since before I left. He thought about that. He thought about the layers of this. The criminal network, the corporate structure, the compromised law enforcement, the intelligence connection to his own past, and now an elderly man in a family estate who might or might not understand what was happening around him. This was not a simple problem. This was not something that resolved cleanly or quickly. He'd known that from the moment he crossed the diner floor. Some part of him, in the back behind the training and the instinct, he'd known this was the kind of problem that took everything you had and still didn't promise a good outcome. He got up at some point and checked on Lily again. She'd shifted in her sleep and the blanket had half fallen off. He replaced it. She made a small sound, not quite waking. Her face in sleep was the face she'd had at 3 years old, which was the face that had reorganized everything he thought he was and replaced it with something quieter and more specific, a life that had only one non-negotiable requirement at its center. He stood in the dark of the adjoining room for a moment. Then he called Pete Gallagher, his neighbor, at 11:30 at night. Pete was 71 and had trouble sleeping and answered on the second ring. Ethan, everything okay? Pete, I need a favor and I need you not to ask a lot of questions. A pause. That sounds like the start of a thing. It is. I need Lily to stay with you for a few days. I'll bring her in the morning. She'll need to go to school from your place. I'll explain to the school. I'll also need you to not mention to anyone that she's with you. Anyone who comes to my house or your house asking about her, you haven't seen her. Another pause, longer this time. Is she safe? She will be if you do this. Then yes. Bring her in the morning. Pete paused once more. Those tomatoes I gave you last August. Did you actually eat them? Despite everything, Ethan almost smiled. Most of them. You're lying. Bring the girl in the morning. He hung up. Through the wall, he could hear Sophia moving around, probably pacing, which was a reasonable response to a night like this one. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked at his hands in the dark. The cut on his jaw had closed. His shoulder ached. He was tired in the bone-deep way of someone who has been running on alertness for 16 hours straight and knows there's no real rest coming for the foreseeable future. The next morning moved in quick, tight segments. He dropped Lily at Pete's house by 7:30. She went without significant protest, which told him she understood more than she'd let on. And at the door she turned around and looked at him with her mother's eyes. He still occasionally caught her doing that, a look that belonged to someone he'd loved and lost years before any of this. And it hit him in the chest the same way every time. And she said, "Be careful, that's not optional." "Never is," he said. "Dad, I'll be careful. I promise." She held his gaze for a moment with the specific, unnerving gravity of a 10-year-old who is evaluating whether the promise is real. Then she went inside, and Pete caught Ethan's eye over her head with an expression that was simple and clear and meant, "I've got her." He drove back to the motel. Sophia was dressed and had coffee from the front desk vending machine waiting, which was either thoughtful or a sign that she'd been awake since before sunrise, probably both. She had the laptop open and had been working. When he came in, she pointed at the screen without preamble. 3 news alerts this morning, she said, from Greyhaven local news. He leaned over and read. The first was about the diner shooting. Officially categorized as a random shooting incident, investigation ongoing, no suspects in custody. The second was a brief item about a person of interest sought in connection with the incident. No name given, but the description was an adult male, late 30s, brown hair, last seen near the Silver Spoon Diner. The third item made him straighten up completely. Former military contractor sought for questioning in connection with a series of financial irregularities at a Pennsylvania technology firm. Authorities believe the individual may be connected to ongoing criminal activity. The individual is considered. He stopped reading. They moved fast, Sophia said. There was the tightness around her mouth that hadn't been there the night before. They're framing you. The shooting investigation is going nowhere publicly because they control the local investigation. But this, she gestured at the screen, this goes wider. They're building a narrative. Former military contractor, Ethan said. It'll be specific enough to identify you to people who know your background. Vague enough that the general public doesn't look too closely. She looked at him. They're not just trying to eliminate us physically. They're building a case that positions you as the criminal so that anything you bring forward is automatically discredited. He sat down. He looked at the coffee she'd brought him and drank some of it, which tasted like something that had happened to coffee at a significant remove. This is Kane, he said. Has to be. This kind of media and legal maneuvering, it's coordinated. It's not local law enforcement improvising. Someone is directing this from the top. Ethan turned the situation over in his mind. They were now fugitives in practical terms, not formally charged with anything yet, but with enough narrative in place that any engagement with law enforcement was a coin flip at best. They had evidence that was solid, but required a trustworthy recipient. They had a connection between Kane and a military intelligence compromise that added federal criminality to the picture. They had limited time before Kane tightened the net. What they'd had as an asset until about 12 hours ago was obscurity. That was gone now, which meant the only direction was forward, not running, not waiting for someone else to move, but deliberately and systematically taking apart Victor Kane's ability to control the narrative before it fully solidified. Because narratives, Ethan knew from a different kind of experience, were like tactical positions. They were much easier to contest in the first 24 hours than after they'd been held and reinforced for a week. He pulled out the burner phone he'd bought with cash at a convenience store 2 towns over the previous evening. "I'm making the call," he said. Sophia nodded. She didn't ask who. She trusted him on this. He could see it, and he didn't take it lightly, because trust from someone who'd been burned as badly as she had was not a small thing, and he intended to be worth it. He dialed from memory. It rang 4 times. A woman's voice answered, careful and professional even at— He glanced at the clock. 7:53 in the morning. "Guyenne. This is Ethan Walker," he said. "You and I did a CQB recertification together at Coronado in 2014. You told me I had bad form on my left side entry, and you were right. I need 10 minutes, and I need you to not record this call." A pause. 3 full seconds. "Walker." Her voice shifted. Not warmer exactly, but less formal. "I heard your name this morning in a context I didn't like." "I know. That's why I'm calling." He looked at Sophia across the small motel room, at the laptop full of carefully documented evidence, at the gray November light coming in through the window gap in the curtains. "I have something for you. It's large, it's real, and part of it is going to matter to you personally, because it involves a compromised defense contract from 9 years ago and 2 servicemen who didn't get justice." Another pause. Longer. "Keep talking," Agent Nguyen said. And Ethan did. Agent Nguyen needed 48 hours. She didn't say it like a request. She said it the way people in her position said most things, flat, specific, non-negotiable in tone, while technically leaving room for argument. Ethan didn't argue. He understood the machinery of federal response well enough to know that 48 hours was actually fast, that she was moving things around to make it happen, and that pushing harder would only introduce variables he couldn't control. What she gave him in exchange for those 48 hours was 2 things. The first was a secure file transfer protocol, an encrypted upload address where Sophia could send the documentary evidence in compressed form without it passing through any network node that Kane's people might be monitoring. The second was a single sentence at the end of the call, delivered in the same flat professional register as everything else. "Don't go back to Grey Haven. Don't go anywhere you've been in the last 6 months. And Walker, stay off anything connected to your real name." He hung up and told Sophia what they had. She absorbed it, nodded once, and went immediately to the laptop to begin packaging the evidence files. She worked with the focused efficiency of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment, who had been sitting on this material for months, hoping for a channel that might actually hold it. Ethan watched her work for a few minutes, the way her eyes moved across the screen, the precise, unhurried keystrokes, the slight tension in her jaw that was the only visible sign of what this was costing her. And then he gave her space and went to think. The 48 hours were the problem. Not because of Nguyen. He trusted her as much as he trusted anyone from that chapter of his life, which was not unconditional, but was genuine. The problem was that 48 hours was also enough time for Kane to finish building his narrative, to move on Sophia's father, to consolidate whatever he was consolidating. Kane had shown in the last 24 hours that he was willing to move fast and blunt when he felt pressure. The framing story in the local news, the tactical contractors on Main Street, the corrupted county detectives, these were not the moves of someone who was patient and careful. These were the moves of someone who believed he was close to the end of a problem and was applying maximum force to finish it. That made him dangerous in a specific way. Careful people were predictable. People in a hurry made decisions. By the end of the first day, Sophia had uploaded everything. She'd also, in the hours while Ethan was working through logistics, identified 2 additional pieces of documentation she'd previously considered too fragmentary to include. Internal meeting notes referencing Meridian 11 by an abbreviated code name and a series of calendar entries from Kane's executive assistant's shared scheduling system that placed Kane in 3 cities on dates that corresponded precisely to major transfers through the Shell network. She added them. And Gwen's system confirmed receipt. They moved motels that afternoon. Different county, paid cash. A place called the Riverside Inn that also had no river within visible distance. Different carpet color, same rattling heating unit. Ethan was starting to feel that rattling heating units were just the ambient sound of this particular period of his life. He called Pete twice. Lily was fine. She'd done homework, eaten dinner, complained that Pete only had 1 streaming service and it didn't have her show. Normal complaints. The most important kind. He slept 4 hours that first night, lightly, with the particular half-awareness he hadn't needed since the Navy. Not quite unconscious, ears still reading the ambient sound of the room for anything that changed. The second day was when everything moved at once. It started at 6 in the morning with a message through the secure channel Nguyen had set up. Not from Nguyen herself, but from a number he didn't recognize. 3 words. Kane took him. He was at Sophia's door in 30 seconds, knocking with the heel of his hand. She opened it already dressed, laptop open on the bed, a look on her face that told him she'd seen the same message. "My father," she said. "When?" "Sometime last night." "The house manager, a woman named Clara who's been with our family for 12 years. She sent a message to my emergency contact protocol. She says 4 men came to the estate at approximately 11 p.m. Said it was a family medical transport. She tried to verify and they didn't let her make calls." Sophia's voice was controlled but only technically. Something underneath it was pulled very tight. "They took him and one of his care nurses and left. Clara said my father..." She stopped, started again. "She said he looked confused. He kept asking where they were going." Ethan said nothing for a moment. He let her have the silence. "He doesn't always know what's happening around him," she said. "Some days are better than others. But he knows me. When I talk to him, he knows me." She pressed her fingers against the edge of the laptop lid. "Kane took him because he's running out of moves. He needs leverage." "He needs leverage," Ethan agreed, "which means he's going to use your father to draw you out." "I know." "Sophia, I know, Ethan." She looked up at him. "I'm not going to do something stupid. I'm not going to walk into whatever he sets up without a plan. But I'm also not going to sit in a motel room in the middle of nowhere while my father while he doesn't understand what's happening to him." She held his gaze. "So we need a plan. A real one. Right now." He pulled the chair from the small desk and sat down, and they worked through it together. Called at 8:15. She'd seen the alert from Clara through the surveillance Sophia's emergency protocol had routed through her federal access. She had a location, or most of one. Kane's tactical team had used 2 vehicles registered to a security firm called Harrow Group, which was one of the private contractor entities Sophia's documents had identified as a Kane asset. Harrow Group maintained a facility in the city, not their official registered address, which was a law office in downtown Philadelphia, but a secondary property that had shown up in the financial documents as a maintenance and operations expense. An abandoned performing arts theater in the old warehouse district, purchased through a holding entity 3 years ago, listed as under renovation. "He's using it as a staging ground," Nguyen said. "We have eyes on the exterior as of 1 hour ago. There are people inside. We can't confirm your father's presence, but the probability is high." "What's your timeline for a federal response?" Ethan said. A pause. "I have authorization to move, but I need to coordinate with the field office, and I need to do it correctly. Because if we go in wrong, we lose the prosecutorial case. I need..." "How long?" "Realistically, 8. He won't wait 8 hours, Ethan said. He took the father to use as leverage. He's going to make contact with Sophia, set terms, give a deadline. When she doesn't comply or can't, he moves to the next option. Nguyen was quiet for a moment. What are you telling me, Walker? I'm telling you I'm going to need the building layout if you have it, and I'm going to need to know what you know about how many people are inside. Another pause. Longer. The kind where someone is deciding something significant. I'm going to pretend, Nguyen said carefully, that this conversation has a particular shape that I'm not entirely seeing, and I'm going to send you what I have on the building because it's relevant to my investigation, and I need it assessed by someone with direct experience in this type of environment. She paused once more. I'm also going to tell you that any private citizen who takes independent action in connection with an active federal investigation would be creating significant legal complications for themselves and for the investigation. Understood, Ethan said. Good. Check the channel in 10 minutes. She hung up. Sophia was looking at him from across the room. She's giving us what we need, Sophia said. She's giving me what she needs to assess. What I do with it is my own business. He met her eyes. This is where I need you to hear me clearly. Whatever we do today, you are not coming into that building. She opened her mouth. Listen to me, he said, not harshly. Not because you can't handle it, and not because I don't trust you. Because you are the case. Everything you've built, every document, every connection, that's the thing that actually ends this. If something happens to you inside that theater, Kane wins. He loses his physical assets, maybe, but the prosecution falls apart without you. He held her gaze. You're more valuable outside, and I need you outside doing something specific. She was quiet for a moment. He could see her working through it, testing the logic, looking for the argument against it. What specific thing? She said finally. Nguyen's people are 6 to 8 hours out. Kane is going to make contact with you before that, probably through a channel he thinks is secure. When he does, I need you to keep him talking, and I need you to get him on record. Whatever you can get him to say about your father, about the network, about what he's done, Nguyen can use that. He paused. Can you do that? She nodded slowly. I can do that. And Sophia, if this goes wrong, it won't. If it does, everything she needs to proceed without us. The case survives regardless. She held his gaze for a moment, and what was in her expression was not quite fear and not quite courage, but something that lived between them. The look of someone who has accepted that a thing is real and has decided to meet it straight on anyway. Come back, she said. Not a question, not exactly a request, just 2 words she needed to say out loud. Working on it, he said. The building layout came through the channel as Nguyen had promised. Ethan studied it for 40 minutes, committing it in the way he'd once committed building schematics before operations. Not memorizing every detail mechanically, but absorbing the logic of the space, the way movement would flow through it, where vision was clear and where it wasn't, where the load-bearing reality of a structure created natural choke points and where it created options. The Caldwell Theater, built in 1931, renovated once in the 1970s and never again. 4 stories including a basement level. Main performance hall on the ground floor with a stage at the east end. Orchestra pit. 2 levels of balcony seating in poor condition. Backstage area with fly rigging still partially intact. Below the stage, a network of original utility corridors connecting to a basement that had been used for storage. There were 3 external access points that the current occupants had likely identified and were covering. There were 2 that they probably hadn't, a coal delivery hatch on the north face that was listed on the original 1931 utility plans and had been sealed over in the renovation but not filled, and a sub-basement connection to a utility corridor that ran under the adjacent block. Ethan picked up the supplies he needed from a hardware store and an army surplus outlet, paying cash, taking time at each stop to check his environment out of habit. He drove to the warehouse district and parked 4 blocks from the theater, on a street that gave him a sightline to the north face of the building without putting him in view of the main approaches. He sat in the truck and watched for 25 minutes. He counted 2 visible exterior positions, one on the roof of the adjacent building covering the main entrance, one at the alley on the south side. Both professionals, both with practiced stillness, neither moving in patterns that suggested boredom, which told him they were experienced enough to know that boredom was when you made mistakes. He didn't see the third position, which meant either there wasn't one or it was good enough that he needed to assume it was covering the angle he couldn't see. He texted Sophia through the secure channel. "Kane contact yet?" Her response came back in under a minute. "Just now. He called. He says he wants to meet. Says my father is comfortable and safe and will stay that way if I come alone to an address he'll provide in 2 hours." Ethan read this twice. "He's going to give a secondary location," he typed back. "He won't use the theater as the meeting point. Too much exposure. He wants to move you to somewhere he controls more completely. Don't agree to any meeting. Tell him you need time to think. You're frightened. You're not sure you trust him. Make him believe you're close to complying but not there yet. Keep him on the line as long as possible." "I know how to stall," she replied. "I ran a corporation for 18 months with a room full of people trying to undermine me. I can handle Victor Kane on the phone." Despite the weight of the moment, that made something in his chest shift slightly. He pocketed the phone. He went in through the coal hatch. It was exactly where the 1931 blueprint said it would be, behind a section of stone foundation that had been faced over with painted concrete but never properly sealed at the seam. It took him 4 minutes to work it open silently. Old iron fittings, decades of rust and grime, the specific physical patience of someone who had done things like this in worse conditions in worse places. He got through without sound and found himself in a sub-basement that smelled of mineral damp and very old wood. He moved through it slowly. No light except what he'd brought. A small tactical flashlight set to its lowest setting, shielded with his palm so it cast only enough illumination to place his feet correctly. He'd done this before in total darkness and could do it again, but the blueprints gave him enough orientation that the light was a reasonable risk. The utility corridor was original construction. Brick walls, low ceiling, the kind of space built for function with no consideration for anything except pipes and electrical runs and the occasional maintenance worker who knew what they were doing. He followed it east, under what his mental map told him was the front of the house, toward the sub-basement beneath the main stage. He heard voices before he reached the stairs. 2 of them, above, through the floor, muffled but audible in the specific way that old theater construction transmitted sound through its bones. He couldn't make out words, but he got cadence and register. Male voices, the relaxed back and forth of men who were waiting rather than doing, which meant they were part of the interior security and they had settled in. He counted at least 3 distinct voices total before he reached the stage access. The stage sublevel was a warren of old storage and mechanical infrastructure. Counterweight systems for the fly rigging, ancient rope and cable on wooden spools. The remnants of sets from productions that had ended 50 years ago. Canvas flats stacked against brick walls, prop furniture draped in dusty cloth. It had the particular quality of abandoned spaces that were once full of life. Not spooky in the way people described spooky, but sad in a quieter, more specific way. The sadness of things that used to matter to somebody. Ethan moved through it and began to work. He found the first device in the stage right wing, a shaped charge attached to a structural column with a remote detonator clipped to a junction box. Not sophisticated, but functional. The kind of demolition setup that someone with military or construction demolition experience could build from commercially available components. He didn't disarm it immediately. He marked the position in his mental map and kept moving. The second device was in the orchestra pit access corridor. Third was at the base of the main staircase to the balcony level, tucked behind a decorative plaster column that had been partially demolished, probably as cover. He found 2 more in this basement level before he was satisfied he had the full picture. 6 devices total. Kane's plan was not subtle. If things went wrong on his end, or if he simply decided the cleanest outcome was elimination of everything and everyone in the building, he wanted the capability to do it. Which told Ethan several things about how Kane thought, and none of them were reassuring. He also found where they were holding Robert Bennett. The former CEO of Bennett Global was in the theater manager's old office, on the 2nd floor at the back of the building. A small room with a single window that had been boarded from the outside. A folding chair. A cot that looked like it had come from a camping supply store. Robert Bennett was 73 years old, and he sat on the edge of the cot with his hands resting on his knees and the careful, uncertain stillness of someone who was not quite sure where he was or why, but who had enough dignity left to sit properly and wait. A single guard was in the hallway outside. Ethan watched through the cracked door for 90 seconds, confirmed the guard's pattern and attention, then moved to the room's internal access, a connecting door to what had been a second office, now used as storage, and came through it quietly. Robert Bennett looked up at him. He didn't yell. He didn't panic. He looked at Ethan with the careful assessment of a man whose mind was unreliable but whose instincts still functioned, and he said, in a voice that was quiet but not weak, "You're not one of his people." "No, sir," Ethan said softly. "My name is Ethan Walker. Your daughter sent me." Something moved through the old man's eyes, recognition or the shape of it, relief finding its way through the fog. "Sophia," he said, "she's safe. She's outside." Ethan crouched in front of him so they were at the same level, keeping his voice below the ambient noise of the building. "I need you to stay very quiet and do exactly what I tell you. Can you do that?" "I'm not an invalid," Robert Bennett said, with a firmness that had survived whatever else hadn't. "Tell me what to do." "In about 3 minutes, I'm going to need you to walk. Not fast, just steady. I'll be right beside you." "All right." Robert looked at him with a clarity that came and went in people with his condition, those windows of precision fully present. "He's going to blow the building," he said. Ethan went very still. "What?" "Kane. I heard him on the phone in the car coming here. I wasn't supposed to. I think they believed I wasn't following, but I heard." Robert's jaw worked for a moment. "He said something about not leaving evidence. He said if she doesn't come, he cleans the room and walks away. And it looks like a gas explosion." Ethan absorbed this. It aligned with what he'd found, the charges, the detonators. And it told him the timeline was shorter than he'd hoped. He pulled out his phone and sent a single message to Sophia. "Accelerate. Get him talking now. Get everything on record. He has charges in the building and he won't wait long." Her reply came in seconds. "He just called again. I'm on with him now. Recording through the channel. He's talking." Then, 30 seconds later, "He said your name. He said he knows you're there." Ethan read that twice. He stood up slowly. "Change of plan," he said to Robert Bennett. "We're moving now." The guard outside the door was a problem he dealt with quickly and without drama. A controlled encounter in the narrow hallway, precise and quiet. The guard down and unhurt and secured with zip ties from Ethan's jacket pocket. He took the guard's radio and earpiece. Through the earpiece, he could hear the interior frequency. 2 voices, sharp now, not the easy cadence of men waiting. They knew. Someone had spotted something, his entry point, a camera he'd missed, something, and the position had collapsed. He keyed the radio once, static, then spoke in the flat command tone that carried no geographic accent. "South exit. He's moving south." A pause. Then movement sounds on the channel. The 2 voices redirecting. Footsteps, a door. He counted 3 seconds and moved north. He got Robert Bennett to the stage left wing before they encountered the second pair, 2 men coming down the internal staircase fast, with the purpose of people responding to an order. Ethan put the first one against the wall with a movement that Robert Bennett probably couldn't fully follow in the low light, and the second man made a decision that Ethan respected. He stepped back, assessed the situation, and didn't engage. Smart. "Don't," Ethan said to him. The same flat quiet as he'd used with Coyle in the diner hallway. The same precise communication that certain situations required. The man stepped back further and let them pass. He got Robert Bennett down through the sub-basement the way he'd come in, which was slower with a 73-year-old who moved carefully on his bad hip, but who did not complain once, and who kept his breathing steady and his head down and followed Ethan's hand signals with a compliance that spoke of either trust or exhaustion, or both. They came out through the coal hatch into the cold air of the north alley, and Ethan guided Robert to the wall and told him to stay low and pulled out his phone. Then he went back in. Not for heroics, for the devices. Because Nguyen's team was coming and federal agents in a building rigged with 6 explosive charges was not a situation he was willing to create by walking away from it. He had the positions memorized. He had the time. He had, as it turned out, less time than he needed. He was on the 4th device, under the stage, in the cramped utility corridor, working the detonator connection with the specific careful pressure that this kind of work required, when the radio in his ear went silent, which was worse than voices, because silence meant someone had changed frequency. He finished the 4th device, moved to the 5th. He heard Kane's voice from somewhere above and to the east. Not through the radio, through the building itself, traveling through old wood and plaster. Kane was not on a phone. He was physically in the building, which changed the geometry of everything. Walker. The name came through the floor like something dropped on it. I know you're down here. I have a trigger. Manual. You want to have this conversation, or you want to skip to the end? Ethan finished the fifth device. His shoulder was aching. He had one to go. I'm going to keep working, Ethan said, at normal volume, letting the old theater's acoustics carry it. You talk. I'll listen. A pause. Then, surprisingly, a short sound that might have been a laugh. Unpleasant, but genuine. You really are what they said you were. What'd they say? That you were the kind of man who didn't stop for anything. That you were the reason the Brennan operation failed, the interdiction. They told me you specifically compromised that operation. That's the official story. Ethan kept his hands moving, steady. You know that's not true. Of course it's not true. I wrote the report. A pause. You have no idea how much I've thought about you, Walker. You and your team. What happened to those two men was... A pause. Unfortunate. Unfortunate, Ethan repeated. Operational necessities rarely feel good from the inside. From the outside, when you understand the full picture. Don't, Ethan said. His voice stayed level. Don't give me the full picture speech. 2 men are dead. You know their names. I know you know their names because you accessed the full personnel file. So don't. Silence. Where's the trigger? Ethan said. Right hand. I press it. Everything in this building goes at once, including you. And your evidence problem gets worse because now you have a federal officer's evidence on file that you can't reach, and a dead man who is in the process of exposing you, and a woman outside who has everything and is on the phone with federal agents right now. He paused. You're good at building things, Kane. You built something genuinely impressive, but you're thinking like someone trying to survive today, not someone thinking about next week. He finished the 6th device. He let out a controlled breath. You took the detonators, Kane said. Not a question, a realization, and behind it something colder, the recognition that the physical option was gone. 6 of them. Yes. A long silence. That still leaves me, Kane said. It does, Ethan said, but I'm coming up now, and you're going to want to think carefully in the next 30 seconds about what you do with that thought. He came up through the stage trap door, an original Victorian-era lift mechanism that still worked on counterweights, and emerged into the main performance hall. The old theater opened above him in tiers of damaged balcony seating, plaster cherubs and decorative cornices obscured by decades of grime, a ceiling that had once been painted and was now the color of age. The stage lights were dead. The only illumination came from work lights that Kane's people had set up at the front of the house, bare LED floods that threw everything into flat, unnatural clarity. Victor Kane was standing at the front of the stage. He was 61 years old, and he looked like a man who had spent 20 years being the most competent person in most rooms, lean, precise, with the controlled bearing of someone who had never needed to raise his voice because he'd always had other mechanisms. I was holding a radio transmitter in his right hand that he now understood did nothing. He looked at Ethan with an expression that took a moment to identify, because it wasn't anger and it wasn't fear. It was something closer to appraisal. The look of someone who has encountered a problem they genuinely respect, even while it is ending them. The girl is outside, Kane said. Yes. Her father. Also outside. Kane looked at the transmitter in his hand and then set it down on the edge of the stage with a deliberateness that was the closest thing to a white flag Ethan had ever seen from someone who'd never surrendered anything in their life. How many federal agents? Enough, Ethan said. Somewhere outside, through the walls of the old theater, the sound of vehicles arrived. Multiple engines, the disciplined stop-and-deploy pattern of a coordinated federal response. Blue and red light began filtering through the gaps in the boarded windows, painting the ruined interior in rhythmic color. Kane looked at all of it, at the lights, at Ethan standing on the stage of an empty theater. I had a plan, Kane said. This wasn't part of it. It never is, Ethan said. He was bleeding from his left shoulder, had been for a while, he realized, from somewhere in the sequence of the last hour that he couldn't precisely recall, the body reporting in when the operational focus finally loosened its grip. Not serious, but it required attention. He He sat down on the edge of the stage. Outside, he could hear Nguyen's people moving, the clear voices of a federal team establishing control. Kane stood very still and waited for them to come in, because there was nothing else left for him to do. And in the flat LED light of the ruined Caldwell Theater, with plaster dust settling on the remains of a stage where people had once come to watch stories end, Ethan Walker held his shoulder with one hand and breathed slowly and let it be over. The paramedics wanted Ethan on a stretcher. He declined, which surprised nobody who had watched him walk out of the Caldwell Theater under his own power with a bullet crease along his left shoulder, and the specific expression of someone who has filed the pain under things to deal with later. The EMT, young woman, red hair pulled back, the resigned professionalism of someone who had argued with difficult patients before, looked at him for a moment and then said, "Okay, but you're sitting down and you're letting me look at that shoulder. That's not a negotiation." "Fair enough," Ethan said, and sat down on the rear bumper of the ambulance. She worked on the shoulder with quick, practiced hands, while the warehouse district filled up with federal vehicles and the organized, controlled noise of an operation reaching its conclusion. Blue lights threw long shadows across the old brick facades. Nguyen's people moved in and out of the Caldwell's main entrance in the deliberate rhythm of evidence collection. Not rushing, not wasting motion. The kind of professional thoroughness that comes from knowing the case has to hold up in court and every step matters. Kane was in federal custody. So were the 7 men taken from the theater's interior, including the 2 Ethan had encountered on the staircase and the man from the hallway outside Robert Bennett's room. The tactical units from the previous day, the ones who had stood down on Main Street, had not returned, which told Ethan they'd received word that the operation was compromised and had pulled back to wherever private contractors go when a job dissolves under them. Nguyen would find them. It would take time, but she would find them. Sophia came around the side of the ambulance and stopped. She'd been with her father for the last 20 minutes. Ethan had seen them through the ambulance bay, the old man sitting on a gurney with a blanket over his shoulders, and Sophia beside him, holding his hand and talking to him in the quiet, sustained way you talk to someone when you weren't sure how much they were absorbing, but you wanted them to feel that everything was real and present and that you were there. Robert Bennett had looked calmer than anyone had a right to expect. He'd looked, from a distance, like a man who'd been frightened and was coming back to himself now that the thing that frightened him was over. Now Sophia looked at Ethan's shoulder and then at his face. And something in her expression did the thing it sometimes did when she wasn't quite controlling it. The professional surface coming slightly apart at the edges. "That was from inside," she said. "You got hit inside the theater." "Grazed," Ethan said. "There's a difference." "You didn't tell me." "You had things to manage. Your father—" "The federal team, Kane on the phone." He paused. "How'd that go, by the way?" "The call?" She looked at him for a moment with the specific expression of someone deciding whether to pursue the first conversation or answer the second one. She answered the second one. He said enough, more than enough. She pulled out her phone, showed him the recording indicator on the secure channel app. The timestamp ran for 47 minutes. He was trying to sound in control, but he needed me to come in, and needing something from someone makes you talk. He confirmed he ordered the shooting at the diner. He talked about the shell structure without naming it directly, but contextually it's clear. He made a reference to Sentinel Bridge, called it a previous arrangement, without specifying what that meant. Nguyen said it fills gaps in what we already sent her. "It will," Ethan said. "Combined with the documents and the Sentinel Bridge personnel filing, it builds a connected case. Corporate fraud, criminal enterprise, military intelligence compromise." He paused. 2 servicemen. Sophia was quiet for a moment. "Will they get justice? The families?" "That's up to federal prosecutors and what they decide to charge and prove. But the evidence is there now. It's on the record. It exists." He looked across the lot to where Nguyen was standing near the theater entrance, speaking with 2 agents. "Someone will have to do the work of following it through. But it can be followed through." That was the honest answer. Not the satisfying one, the honest one. Justice in the real world was not a switch that flipped. It was a process, grinding and imperfect and subject to all the friction that human institutions carried. But the alternative to an imperfect process was no process at all. And Ethan had spent enough of his life operating in places where there was no process at all to understand the difference clearly. The EMT finished taping his shoulder, told him the wound needed sutures, and that if he developed a fever in the next 48 hours, he needed to go to an emergency room and not try to manage it himself, and looked at him with the specific expression that communicated she knew he was going to try to manage it himself. "I heard you," he said. "You heard me," she said, with no particular confidence that hearing and doing were connected in his case. Came to him an hour later, after the initial scene had been processed, and Kane had been transported and the immediate operational noise had settled into the slower, quieter work of documentation and chain of custody. She was in her early 40s, compact and direct, with the kind of face that didn't give much away by default, but was capable of a great deal of expression when she decided to allow it. She looked at him for a moment before she said anything. "You're going to be a complicated person to write a report about," she said. "I was never here," Ethan said. "A private citizen responding to a family emergency in the vicinity of a federal investigation who may have incidentally encountered some individuals and some infrastructure relevant to that investigation." She said it flatly, the way you recite something you've already decided on. "That's the shape it takes." "Appreciated." "The Sentinel Bridge material," she said. "It's solid. I already have the Financial Crimes Division engaged on the Bennett Global documents. That piece was moving before tonight, but the intelligence compromise is going to a separate unit. It's going to take time. These things take time." "I know." "Walker." She stopped. She almost never used first names. He remembered that from Coronado, the careful professional distance she maintained as a matter of habit. The fact that she'd used his name told him something was coming that didn't fit the professional register. "Reeves, your old CO. He filed a supplemental report 8 years ago that went nowhere. 3 pages. Said he believed the operation compromise originated with a domestic contractor and named Sentinel Bridge as a probable source." She paused. "It was buried in an administrative archive. I found it yesterday." Ethan said nothing. "He tried," she said. "He put it on the record. It didn't go where it should have gone, and that's a failure of the system, and I can't fix what happened 8 years ago, but I want you to know he tried." Ethan looked at the wet asphalt of the parking lot, at the blue light still moving across it, at the reflected color of everything that had happened tonight pooling in the surface water like paint. "I'll call him," he said. "He should know how this ended." She nodded once, businesslike again, the personal moment folded away. "We're going to need statements, formal ones on record from both you and Ms. Bennett. Not tonight, when you're ready, but within the week." "We'll be there." She walked back toward the theater. He watched her go, and he thought about 2 men named Torres and Garfield who had died on a compromised operation 9 years ago, and whose families had been told it was bad luck and fog of war and the unavoidable cost of the work. He thought about the fact that neither of them would know how this ended, which was its own specific, unresolvable weight. The living made decisions and the dead received the consequences of them, and that was one of the things about this kind of work that nobody who hadn't done it ever quite understood from the outside. He stayed with that for a moment. He didn't push it away. He'd learned, over years, that the things you pushed away just found other doors. Then he took out his phone and called Pete Gallagher. Pete answered on the first ring. "You okay?" "Yeah, it's done." A pause. The sound of the television in Pete's living room in the background. Low volume. "Lily's asleep. She made me watch some show with her about a girl who solves crimes at her school. It was actually pretty good. Tell her I'll be there in the morning." "I'll tell her," Pete said. "Ethan." "Yeah." "Whatever you did tonight, you did it right. I don't need to know what it was." Ethan didn't say anything for a moment. "Thanks, Pete. Those tomatoes I gave you in August. Did you make anything with them, or did they just go bad?" "I made sauce," Ethan said, which was not entirely true. He had made sauce with about 1/3 of them, and the rest had gone soft on the counter. But Pete didn't need all of that. "Good," Pete said, satisfied, and hung up. The weeks that followed moved in a different register than the days before them. Slower on the surface, faster underneath, the particular rhythm of aftermath when everything that was happening had shifted from physical to procedural. Ethan gave his statement to federal investigators over 2 sessions, each 3 hours long, in a field office conference room with bad coffee and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly unwell. It was precise and complete, and left nothing out that mattered, including the details about his movements inside the Caldwell that Nguyen had told him would be handled as incidental civilian action. The narrative that Kane had planted in the local media, the former military contractor, the person of interest, the manufactured story of criminal involvement, collapsed within 72 hours of Kane's arrest. The federal indictment, when it was unsealed, included a specific count relating to the fabrication and dissemination of false information targeting a private citizen, which was Ethan. That count was almost certainly going to be among the easier ones to prosecute. Local news in Grey Haven ran a correction, 3 paragraphs below the fold of the online edition, the kind of correction that reaches only a fraction of the people who saw the original story. That was how it worked. The damage traveled fast and the repair traveled slow, and you accepted that because the alternative was bitterness, and bitterness was a full-time occupation that didn't leave room for much else. Marsh and Coyle were suspended pending investigation within the first week. 2 of the tactical contractors from Main Street were identified through vehicle records and brought in for questioning. The Harrow Group's operational license was suspended. 3 of Bennett Global's senior executives were arrested in a coordinated action that Nguyen's division had apparently been planning to execute regardless of the theater operation. The Bennett Global case, she told Ethan afterward, had been moving on its own timeline and had simply arrived at the same destination through a different route. Victor Kane was charged with 29 counts across 3 categories: criminal enterprise and conspiracy, financial crimes affecting the securities markets, and a separate military and federal intelligence charge that had been filed by a different division entirely and carried consequences that would outlast any single proceeding. His lawyers were experienced and expensive and entered not guilty pleas across the board, which was their right and their job and the expected shape of how things like this proceeded. The trial would take years. Ethan understood this and had made a specific decision not to organize his life around watching it. The connection to Sentinel Bridge, to the compromised operation, to Torres and Garfield, was referred to a specialized federal division that handled cases at the intersection of criminal enterprise and intelligence community failures. Ethan was told this would move slowly. He was told that the families of the 2 men would be notified through appropriate channels, that the supplemental report Reeves had filed 8 years ago would be formally acknowledged, and that there were no guarantees about what shape the final accountability would take. He accepted this. He didn't like it, but he accepted it, because acceptance and approval were not the same thing, and he had learned over the years to distinguish between them. He called Reeves on a Tuesday morning from his own phone, from his own kitchen, which felt significant in a way that was hard to explain. Just the fact of being able to use his real name on his real phone in a place he was actually allowed to be. Reeves picked up on the 3rd ring, and Ethan could hear the Maine coast in the background. Wind off the water, the particular quality of open space that carried even through a phone. "Walker," Reeves said. "Colonel." "I'm not a colonel anymore, haven't been for 7 years. "Old habits." A pause. The wind. "I saw a news item about a federal indictment. Bennett Global. Sentinel Bridge listed as a prior entity." He paused. "I recognized the architecture." "I know you did. I wanted to call you directly." Ethan sat down at his kitchen table. "The supplemental report you filed. Nguyen's team found it." A longer pause. 8 years in an archive," Reeves said finally. His voice was even, but something underneath it had shifted. "I wondered sometimes if it existed anymore. If someone had deleted it." "It existed. It's on the record now." Ethan paused. "You put it there. That mattered." "Torres and Garfield," Reeves said. "Just the names. Nothing else." "I know," Ethan said. They stayed on the line without speaking for a moment. The 2 of them, and the Maine wind, and the specific silence of men who had shared things that didn't reduce to language very well, and had long since stopped trying to force them into it. "You doing all right, Walker?" Reeves said. "Yeah, I am." He looked around his kitchen, the slightly uneven cabinet door he'd been meaning to fix for a year, the coffee maker that took too long, Lily's soccer schedule magnetized to the refrigerator door. "I'm doing all right." "Good," Reeves said. "That's the right outcome." Walker Automotive reopened on a Wednesday morning 3 weeks after the diner shooting. Ethan unlocked the bay door at 7 a.m. and found Marcus already there, leaning against his car with a coffee from the gas station 2 blocks over, looking slightly offended at having been beaten to the lot by someone who'd been through what Ethan had been through. "You couldn't just take another week?" Marcus said. Timing chain's been sitting since the 14th, Ethan said. It's not going to finish itself. Marcus looked at him for a moment. You're bleeding through your shirt. I'm aware. The shoulder was healing, imperfectly and on its own schedule, the way bodies healed when you pushed them before they were ready. It's fine. It's not fine. Get the bay open, Ethan said. Marcus got the bay open. The first customer came in at 8:15. By noon, they had 4 jobs on the board, and the radio playing and the specific comfortable noise of a working shop, metal and engine and the hiss of the air compressor, and Ethan was under a 2018 Chevy Colorado with his sleeves rolled up and his mind on the problem directly in front of him, which was the only place his mind needed to be. Lily came by after school, which she sometimes did. She dropped her backpack in the small office and did homework at the desk, and came out periodically to ask Ethan questions about things that had nothing to do with engines, which was her standard operating mode in the shop. That day's questions included whether it was biologically possible for a cat to have a grudge, what the largest prime number was, and whether Ethan thought that her English teacher assigned too much reading or just the right amount. Too much, Ethan said from under the Colorado. That's what I said. She disagrees. She's the teacher. That doesn't mean she's right. He slid out from under the vehicle and looked at his daughter, who was 10 years old and had flour on her sleeve from something she'd apparently made in school, and was looking at him with the steady dark eyes that still made his chest do that specific thing. No, he agreed. It doesn't mean she's right. Lily absorbed this and went back to her homework, satisfied. He had not, in those 3 weeks, fully explained to her what had happened. She knew more than he'd told her, she always did, reading the edges of things, assembling the partial information she was given into something more complete than he probably intended. She'd seen the news items. She was a 10-year-old who knew how to use a search engine. He'd sat with her one evening and given her a version that was honest without being comprehensive, and she'd listened with the careful attention she brought to things that mattered to her. And at the end she'd said, "The woman, Sophia, is she okay?" "She's okay." "And you're okay?" "I'm okay." She'd nodded slowly. Okay. Then she'd gone back to whatever she was reading, because she was 10 and she had a book, and the crisis was resolved and there was processing to do that didn't require him to be present for it. He respected that. It was, in fact, one of the things he was most proud of. Not that she didn't feel things, but that she had room inside herself to feel them and then set them down and move on. He didn't know exactly how she'd developed that, whether it was her nature or something she'd assembled from the particular shape of the life they had together. He suspected it was both, the way most things were. Sophia came to the shop for the first time on a Saturday, 6 weeks after the Caldwell. She'd texted the day before, not to ask if it was okay, just to say she was coming, which he appreciated because it was direct. She pulled up in a rental car because her own car was still somewhere in the middle of a federal evidence inventory, and she was in jeans and a jacket, and she looked different from the diner and different from the motel and different from the night outside the theater. She looked, he thought, like someone who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had recently put it down and was still recalibrating to the absence of the weight. He was in the middle of a brake job and he came out wiping his hands on a shop rag, and she looked at the shop for a moment before she looked at him, taking in the bay and the car on the lift, and Marcus visible in the background giving her the specific appraising look he gave all of Ethan's visitors and which Ethan had given up trying to discourage. "Smaller than I pictured," she said. "It's a 2-bay shop in Greyhaven, Pennsylvania," he said. "What were you picturing?" "I don't know, something bigger." She looked at him. "How's the shoulder?" "Better. How's your father?" Something moved across her face, the particular softness and sorrow and complicated love that the question about her father always produced. "He's home. He has more staff now, Shas. I've restructured his care team completely, people I hired directly, people I trust. He has good days." She paused. "He has hard days, but he's home and he's safe. Good." "I wanted to tell you something," she said. She was looking at him directly in the way she'd looked at him since the beginning, that unblinking quality that he'd initially cataloged as situational awareness, and had since understood was simply how she was. The board approved the foundation last week, officially chartered, initial funding committed, the full proposal, support for families affected by organized crime, assistance programs for veterans in transition. She paused. "I wanted you to know that before I told anyone else." He'd known she was working on it. She'd mentioned it twice in the week since, briefly, in the matter-of-fact way she handled things she intended to actually do rather than things she was considering. But hearing it as a done thing was different. "What are you calling it?" he said. She held his gaze for a moment. "Still deciding. I had some ideas, but nothing that felt right yet." A pause. "I thought I might ask the person who requested it." He thought about Torres, about Garfield, about Reeves filing a report that spent 8 years in an archive, about every person who had moved through the machinery of organized harm and come out the other side with less than they went in with, less safety, less dignity, less of whoever they'd been before someone else's choices had intersected with their lives. "Keep it simple," he said, "something that says what it does without making it sound like a monument." She nodded slowly. "I'll figure it out." She stayed for 2 hours. She drank coffee that was significantly better than motel vending machine coffee, which she noted aloud. She talked to Marcus for a while about something Ethan couldn't hear from the bay, and Marcus laughed at whatever she said, which told Ethan she was funny in a way she'd never had occasion to be in the context of their first 3 weeks together. He filed this away in the same place he filed other things about her. Not analyzed, just kept. Before she left, she found Lily in the small office, still working through weekend homework at the desk. "You're Lily," Sophia said. "You're Sophia," Lily said, looking up. "You're the reason my dad's shoulder is messed up." Sophia considered this for a moment. "That's not completely wrong. He says it wasn't your fault." "It wasn't completely my fault. There's a difference." Sophia looked at her. "How's the homework?" "Terrible. It's history." "History as in boring facts, dates, or history as in something specific?" "The causes of things," Lily said. "We're supposed to write about what causes big events to happen. My teacher wants 3 paragraphs. She made a face. "Everything has like 10 causes. How do you pick 3? Sophia looked at her for a moment, and then she sat down on the edge of the desk, not taking over, just settling in, and said, "Pick the one that started everything else moving. Then pick the one that could have stopped it, but didn't. Then pick the one that nobody talked about at the time." She paused. "That's usually enough." Lily looked at her. Then she looked at her blank page. Then she picked up her pencil and started writing. Sophia caught Ethan's eye through the office window, and he looked away before either of them had to deal with whatever expression was on his face. She left at 4 o'clock, before the afternoon got darker, and before it turned into something that had to be defined. That was fine. Things that didn't need to be defined right away were better left alone to find their own shape, and he had learned over the years that the best developments in a life were usually the ones that arrived without announcement and simply became obvious over time. He locked the shop at 5:30 and drove home with Lily in the passenger seat, who was quiet in a way that meant she was thinking, rather than a way that meant anything was wrong. He made dinner, pasta with jarred sauce, which he had no particular feelings about being a shortcut, because pasta with jarred sauce. On a Saturday was fine, and they ate at the kitchen table, and Lily told him that Sophia had helped her figure out how to structure the history assignment and that it had actually come together pretty well. "What did you write about?" Ethan said. "The causes of the thing." She twirled pasta on her fork. "The start, the thing that could have stopped it, and the thing nobody talked about." "What was the thing nobody talked about?" Lily considered. "Fear," she said. "My teacher wanted economic reasons or political reasons, but I think it was mostly fear. People do a lot of things because they're afraid and then call it something else afterward." Ethan looked at his daughter. "That's a good paper," he said. She shrugged, unbothered. "I think so too." He cleaned up while she finished homework at the kitchen table, and then she went to bed at 8:30, still holding a pencil in the specific way she'd carried it since she first learned to write, between the wrong fingers by any standard, but too ingrained now to correct, and he'd long since stopped trying. He sat on the front porch for a while after. The November air had the particular cold of a season that had committed to itself, dry and clean and without apology. The street was quiet. The neighbors' Halloween decorations were still up on the house 3 doors down, the kind of oversight that happened when life got busy and there was always something more pressing. His shoulder ached in the consistent low register it had maintained for weeks. The shop had a good week ahead, 2 scheduled services, a full transmission job that Marcus had quoted on Friday, a sedan with electrical gremlins that Ethan was actually looking forward to because electrical problems were puzzles, and he still liked puzzles. He thought about a lot of things in the quiet. He thought about Victor Kane, who was in a federal detention facility and would be there for the foreseeable future, and about the 29 counts that a team of federal prosecutors were building into a case that would take years and consume enormous resources and might, in the end, produce outcomes that felt proportionate or might produce outcomes that didn't and probably would produce some of both. That was the justice system, not a mechanism for satisfaction, but a mechanism for process. And process was what separated civilized life from the alternative, even when the process was slow and expensive and human, and therefore imperfect. He thought about Torres and Garfield and the letters he'd written to their families 9 years ago, and about the fact that those families might now receive a different kind of letter, an official one, with the proper seals and language, telling them that what happened had not been fog of war, and had not been misfortune, and had been somebody's specific, deliberate decision. Whether that letter would make anything better was a question he genuinely couldn't answer. He hoped it would. He thought it might, for some of them. He understood that for others it might simply reopen something that had scarred over and that the reopening was its own kind of damage. He thought about Sophia, 3 hours away in Philadelphia, probably in a board meeting or on a call with legal counsel, or sitting in her father's house watching her father have a good evening, and about the fact that she had spent 4 months living as someone she wasn't in a town called Gray Haven, and had spent those 4 months watching an auto mechanic on Tuesday mornings with the careful, patient attention of someone gathering information she might need. She'd been doing what he'd been doing, just from the other direction. There was something in that which struck him as true in a larger sense, beyond their particular situation. People moved through the world processing it, filing it, building pictures of the people around them from the available evidence, waiting to understand what something meant before deciding what to do about it. Most of the time, that process happened without any particular consequence. Occasionally, it mattered enormously. You couldn't always know in advance which kind of moment you were in, which was perhaps why it was worth paying attention all the time, even when nothing seemed to be happening. He'd been a SEAL, and then he'd been a mechanic, and he'd been a father through all of it, and those three things didn't resolve into a single coherent identity as neatly as he sometimes wished they did. He was a person who contained all of them and managed the tensions between them with varying success depending on the day, and that was what it actually meant to be a person rather than a character in a story about a person. He wasn't the decorated operator who'd lived for the mission. He wasn't the quiet widower who'd disappeared into small-town life and wanted no part of anything large. I was someone who had loved that work and had also been exhausted by it, who had chosen this life, and also sometimes chafed against the smallness of it, who had walked across a diner floor toward a shooting without hesitation, and who had also spent 3 weeks after the Caldwell lying awake at 2 in the morning, replaying the things he could have done differently. Both things. All of it, simultaneously, unresolved. That was the part that stories about people like him usually left out. The lack of resolution. The fact that the action ended, but the person continued, carrying everything forward into ordinary mornings, into break jobs and burnt pancakes and his daughter's history homework, and the slow, patient work of just being alive inside a life that didn't feel exceptional most of the time, and sometimes was. He went inside at 9:30, checked the door locks out of habit, checked on Lily, sleeping, the pencil finally set down on the nightstand, and went to bed himself. He slept well. Not perfectly. His shoulder woke him at 4 and he lay there for a while in the dark thinking about nothing in particular, or trying to, before he drifted back under. But well enough. Better than the Harborview Motel, better than the nights after the compromise mission 9 years ago, better than the long stretches of Lily's first year when sleeping felt like a structural failure he couldn't afford. Well enough was, in his experience, the realistic ceiling on most nights, and he had learned to respect it rather than resent it. In the morning, he made pancakes. He burned one of them, the second one from the first batch, which always happened and which Lily always noticed and which she ate anyway without comment because she was his daughter, and she had grown up understanding that the evidence of effort was not the same as the evidence of failure. She ate her pancakes, and he drank his coffee, and the morning light came through the kitchen window at the particular low November angle that made everything in the kitchen look slightly golden and temporary, the way November light always did, like a thing that knew it wasn't staying. Outside on the street, Gray Haven was starting its day. A car went past. A dog barked twice and stopped. Somewhere down the block, someone was running a leaf blower, fighting the losing seasonal battle against what the trees kept letting go. Ethan Walker drank his coffee and watched his daughter eat pancakes and thought about nothing that required any action from him this morning, which was, he had come to understand, not a small thing at all. It was in fact everything he had ever fought for.